Okay, great. Thank you, Prashant, for the reminder. So, yeah, I just wanted to share my journey. In full disclosure, as I was telling, I'm not a security expert by training. My specialization is applying data science, data management techniques, and I've done so more lately for risk management related problems, including software security and whatnot. Before founding TeejLab, I started the R&D division of Black Duck Software. So if you have used open source or any other tools for open source related problems, Log4j is the recent one. So my team was responsible for applying different data science techniques to cover the intelligence that was needed to find licensing issues, security issues, and whatnot. Before Black Duck Software, I was with SAP as a research director. Once again, I was part of a team that was responsible for open source risk management across different products and services. Before that, I was with academia, did my PhD at the University of Alberta in Canada, then took a stint at Singapore as a research scientist, worked with different teams, had the luxury of working with many talented colleagues all over the place. And today's topic is basically a cumulative experience that I have gained more so recently on API risk management related problems. So with that background, here is the agenda that will essentially guide us. I do not necessarily want to script it the way it is written. I want this to be a dialogue. So please feel free to stop me. This is very unusual because we are using Zoom, which is by us because of the technical glitches. We decided to use this. So if I may request everyone to please mute your microphones, but please feel free to unmute yourself or ask questions through the chat window. I've been joined by my colleague Nicole, and also Prashant and Swarup are also there from OWASP team to help us. So feel free to stop me, pause me. I'm happy to answer any questions that may come during the presentation. But as a guide, as I mentioned, I want to share with you what's happening at the global scale from an API ecosystem perspective. What's happening within the enterprises, how APIs are transforming different digital systems, and with that, what are the new security and risk management related problems we see. And then towards the later part, I want to spend some time on talking about zero trust model. This model, as you know, is not necessarily built for API risk management only. It's a larger model for a enterprise-wide cybersecurity programs, but nonetheless, I will share some inspirations how we can adopt this model for the API risk related problems as well. If time permits, I will share some hands-on experience using our community platform, where I will walk you through some of the use cases with respect to API risk management related problems. So just at a very high level, I'm sure every one of you are familiar with APIs. I don't need to teach you what is an API, but this is an ecosystem that may be true for a lot of organizations, where essentially APIs are connecting your different digital systems. These could be APIs that are from your partners. These could be APIs from your internal teams. This could be APIs, just commercial, APIs that are from the different vendors. Now, the focus of this topic is the APIs that are available through the web. So APIs, as you know, have been existing for more than 5 decades, but we are focused on APIs that are available through, let's say, HTTP protocol over the internet that you can invoke remotely. So at a global level, I'm not sure whether you know this or not, but 83% of the internet traffic as of today is through web APIs. This number was published by Akamai last year, I believe. This is a very important number to understand from a global perspective. In theory, each API is like an information or an antidote to your information system. So in theory, if each API within your organization has access to certain pieces of information and whatnot, then your attack surface is also 83%. More or less, these numbers could vary depending on your organization. But again, this is a mind-boggling number. And as a matter of fact, a lot of organizations have estimated many enterprise applications, the major attack surface will be APIs. And we did our own research at TeejLab. We took a sample of the internet. We wanted to see what kind of APIs exist. Of course, there are portals, there are, API documentations and whatnot. But we wanted to see what kind of APIs are there and how many of such APIs exist that are publicly available. So our conservative estimate tells us already there are 1 million APIs we can see actually. But I was corrected by many colleagues and other organizations that this number could already be very small. And I tend to agree with them. If you look at IoT, if you look at low code, no code development, if you look at the way software is moving into the cloud, data is moving into the cloud. So these numbers will evolve, if not right now, into millions, but you can expect them into billions in the future as well. Just like websites grew. Essentially, APIs are providing information. So for machine-to-machine communication, to provide that seamless integrations, you will see an explosion of APIs moving forward. I also wanted to share with you the enterprise view, how APIs may look like. In a very large enterprise or even a medium enterprise, you may have certain tools that are part of your API ecosystem. You may have software security tools, network analysis tools. You may have benchmark tools. A lot of open source tools are there that could be part of your API ecosystems or connecting different systems. On top of that, you may have gateways. You may have service meshes, as shown on the right-hand side. These are essentially to control your API usages. Either you are consuming them or you're producing them. They help you. These tools help you with different technical and business functionalities. On top of that, you may have marketplaces where you're publishing APIs that your vendors or partners are consuming them, and you could be both consumers as well as producers of APIs. If you move up this ladder, you will see different stakeholders. You may have different communities, you may have different customers and partners, and they are all interacting with your API ecosystem. So the point I'm trying to make here is your API ecosystem may already be very complex. Now, this is not always true in all the organization that this entire solution or architect may be in place, but again, you get the point. So why this is complex? Since this topic is about APIs, from this very high-level overview, I want to take you to the lower level, what kind of APIs we see in this ecosystem and how they can pose risk to your organization, or different kinds of risks we'll see. So on the very left-hand side, I have bucketed APIs that I call external APIs. Now, the definition of external APIs, depending on your organization, these are the APIs that you're exposing to your customers or partners, or these could be external APIs that you're consuming. You could have a vendor, you could have a partner that has integrated your different digital products and services. In the middle, the internal APIs could be APIs that are enabling different connectedness, within your different business units. These are APIs that are not necessarily exposed to the public or to your customers and partners, but just for internal reasons. But this could also be these could also be APIs that you're consuming from your partner, but they are not necessarily making it available to general public, but just integrating with your products and services. as you can see, the terms themselves could be very confusing. What is internal API? What could be internal to you, maybe external to some others. On top of this, you could have APIs that you do not even know. Now, this is very interesting category, and this happens all the time. You may download a GitHub library for a specific functionality, or you may integrate a third-party solution for a specific technical reason, not necessarily knowing that that library or that open source project may have certain API integrations already. So as we speak, you may already have certain APIs that are part of your ecosystem. Maybe they are operational, they are not, they're just statically embedded within your code base. But again, the point is, there could be APIs that you do not even know. There is another reason, you could be buying companies, or your organization may be acquiring different assets, and these products get integrated. And not knowing these APIs, or let alone the vendors, and where exactly these APIs are hosted, what they do, is not good for you from a risk management perspective. And this is another view that I wanted to share with you from a data governance perspective. And as you know, APIs are nothing but, they're transacting data. You are pulling certain data, or even sometimes just a decision. The data could be image, could be speech, could be text or whatnot. If you look at this picture, then each dot here represents your API vendor or a API server that is hosted somewhere, in different geographies. This is actually a real snapshot of an enterprise API ecosystem. And you can already see the complexities here from a data governance perspective. You may have a vendor, you thought that this is based in the same country that you are, and you have as an enterprise mandate, or as part of the law of the land, you need to be compliant. But again, that vendor may be hosting their API somewhere else. So each time you invoke this API, basically your data is being transacted in a different location. Of course, you may have a one-to-one relationship, or you may have specific ways that you have integrated this solution. The different vendors provide different hosting services. So again, not necessarily always true, but again, depending on if you have just taken off-the-shelf API integrated without doing the proper due diligence, you could be looking at some problems from a data governance perspective. Now, before I get into some of the risks that may be posed because of these evolving APIs, either from internal APIs perspective, external APIs perspective, or the APIs that you did not even know. But before I get to that, I just wanted to give a quick pause to see if anybody has any question, or maybe any feedback from Swarup or Prashant or Nicole. How are you doing on time? Am I going too slow, too fast? Please let me know if there is any feedback.
Sure, Baljeet, I think we can go ahead. We don't have any questions at this moment.
Okay, great. Thank you, Swarup. All right, so let's go into some of the topics that you guys actually are the experts. But I still wanted to share with you some of the issues we see with different APIs that we are tracking. So we are tracking thousands and thousands of APIs at a global scale. And this is one of the examples that I wanted to share with you. In this particular case, this API was essentially leaking personal information, and not just email or last name or name or address, but also credit card information. Not just the credit card numbers, but also the security code that would enable, with the expiration date and all, to do the actual transaction. And this is tip of the iceberg. Now, not every API is transacting, credit card information, personal information, but you can see a lot of APIs have that nature. Even a sign-on API could have, email or name or first name or last name. So many APIs could fall into this category. And we have seen many cases where APIs are broken and they are exposing these kind of data. Now, here is an interesting research that I want to share with you. And And let me spend maybe a minute or two to explain what are we seeing on the screen right now. I don't need to tell you what is OWASP top 10 API specific problems. You know, you guys are the authors. Thanks to the OWASP community. They have given OWASP top 10, problems that you guys have identified that would affect APIs. What we did was we took NVD data. Again, if you don't know what NVD is, I'm sure most of you know National Vulnerability Database, which is managed by NIST. We took that data and narrowed down onto the problems that were reported to API-specific problems. And as you know, NVD does not only report open source problems or related vulnerabilities or API-specific problems, they're reporting everything, operating systems, and whatnot. So we took the last 10 years or so of data and basically identified the vulnerabilities or the problems that were reported that we could tie down to API-specific problems. And as the results suggested, we identified broken authentication and authorization as the top 2 problems as well. Now, in the OWASP recommendation, these are the also top 5 problems that you guys have identified. So 2 independent studies, very nice to see here that, empirical results show, the evidence shows us that those are the indeed top problems that are affecting API ecosystems at a global scale. Specifically, authentication authorization, as you know, are very crucial for accessing any resources within your organization. And of course, there could be, other problems like, if you don't have rate limits on your APIs, it could launch or the hackers could launch a service of denial attack and whatnot. But again, we'll stay focused on authentication authorization related problems. Once again, just for the sake of completeness, let me explain what kind of authentication problems we are seeing. Once again, with all due respect, you guys are the experts at OWASP. But when we did this investigation, we found that many APIs without authentication. So the first thing we want to check is, again, is there any protection on this API? Even we found cases where, certain APIs had the, let's say, API key-based authentication mechanisms, but their API keys were weak. In some cases, we found that after 6 months, API keys were not being rotated. As you can imagine, when APIs keys are compromised, it's basically accessing your API, on your behalf. So once your API keys is leaked, you can get access. Even in some cases, for example, in a multi-factor authentication or token-based, the tokens were somehow compromised or easy to guess. So we see all those problems with authentication related, which were basically authentication related problems. When it comes to authorization, as you know, BOLA and function level problems are there. And essentially, these are nomenclature related problems. And in many cases, you may assume you have authenticated, but that does not necessarily mean that you're authorized to access all the resources. In this particular case, you see 2 different URLs or URIs being used to invoke 2 different services. Now, APIs are nothing but in many ways, it's a software as a service that is hosted, and this URL basically specifies which service. And many times, authorizations layers are built as business logic within your software ecosystem. There could be framework that are already enabling those kind of authorization layers, but in many cases, you need to customize those business logics, which authorizes your different access to different resources. So in this case, just because I was able to access Department 1, I should not be getting access to Department 2. But in this particular case, by simply manipulating the nomenclature of the URL, I was able to get access to some of the other resources. Looks like there is a question. Let me take a quick pause here. Okay, so there is a question which says, by password, do you mean by actual API keys? No, I do not mean by that. API keys are keys, but password I'm talking about, let's say, for example, in the case of basic authentication. So as you know, you basically encode it. You take the user ID password, you encode it, and basically that creates a token for basic authentication. So I'm talking about those two separate cases. Hopefully that answered the question, but if there is any follow-up, please do not hesitate to type in again. All right, so now we have seen, this is essentially a object level. Okay, so you're welcome. So now, as you know, the authorization problems can be categorized into basically two categories. One is object level, one is function level. The difference is the granularity. So at the function level, your entire module is compromised. Maybe in some cases, you get the admin access. So in this case, essentially, the business logic is broken where you are getting access to the entire module. And again, there is no one way to identify these problems. But again, at a very high level, you can imagine you have access to one single resource, but in some cases you have access to all the resources from all the users like an admin. So in this case, by simply manipulating this URL, we were able to access the admin resources. Now, all these problems I talked about, you guys are very much familiar with the security problems from authentication, authorization. There are a bunch of tools available that allow you to do this kind of pen testing or other aspects of quality assessment and looking into security problems. Now let me twist it here a bit here and show you other sides of the security problems from a financial risk perspective, from a regulatory risk perspective, and maybe from an operational risk perspective. As you know, when we receive a CVE, it's very natural that we want to see, okay, which one is the top, which has the highest CVSS score. So in many ways, security is always about prioritization. There is no point in time where you say, okay, I'm 100% done and we are 100% secure. That never happens. It's always a moving target problem. So from a risk management perspective, it is all about prioritization. And APIs are no different, right? So, but how do you prioritize? On what basis do you prioritize? That is the heart of the problem I'm going to address here. So looking at the security problems, authentication, authorization problems, or injection problems, or other kinds of problems that you may see, they all have some impact on your organization. Some have less, some have more. Some have direct impact on your finances. Some have impact on your credibility or on the operational aspect. So this is one way where we can prioritize API risks. So security problems, as you can imagine, are very straightforward. Legal problems, in many ways, you can see legal problem is like the other side of the same coin. For example, one of your APIs is compromised because the authentication is broken, and essentially it's giving access to all your user data or customer data. And if this contains some more sensitive information, then essentially you could be looking at lawsuits. If your customers or your partners are not happy about it, it's very easy to see that translation happening where the security problems could lead to the legal risks. Easy to understand. Now, the financial risks may not necessarily be very apparent to you, simply because, it depends on the nature of what API does. Let me give you a couple of examples here. So let's talk about a payment processing API. So if it is transacting dollar value, if that API shuts down, you can see the immediate impact, the financial impact. But if, let's say, even if this was an API, let's say it was a tweet API that is basically collecting the latest tweets from a system. And if you can put a dollar value onto your tweet, then again, you can relate to the financial, because eventually that is what your what is generating revenue for you. So not directly related, but again, if your social media API shuts down, what is the financial impact on your organization? So you have to do that kind of analysis. So operational risk is, again, you may not have a security problem, you may not necessarily have a direct financial impact, but you could slow down your system in a way where you could lose the credibility. So let me give you a real-time example here. So I was part of a team where we had actually acquired a company, and as part of the due diligence process, we did the technical due diligence, look at the software, we look at the licensing risk, we look at the security, we look at the publicly known vulnerabilities, the typical due diligence process that you would conduct. Unfortunately, we didn't have the thought process as well as the tooling in place to do the API risk management, API risk assessment. And this asset we had acquired, a SaaS solution, had millions of lines of code. And eventually what happened, the long story short is this application started choking down after 6 months or so. We had no idea what was happening, but eventually we figured it out. There was one API that was essentially going into the loop as certain other processes invoke that API. And since that API was not able to pull the data, it was basically choking the entire application. Once again, there was no immediate security risk. But again, as you can see, that brought down the entire application whenever that function was invoked. And basically that led to unhappy customers and partners, and that was not good. The regulatory risks are, again, somehow could surface, not immediately, but they could surface when you, let's say, for example, conduct an audit. The real example could be, let's say, for a GDPR compliance, you needed to, or you were required to disclose your third-party APIs. Now, you were not necessarily required to disclose your third-party APIs, but you were required to disclose your third parties where the data could be processed or stored, or whatever the scenario might be. As you can imagine, but not knowing your APIs and where these APIs are hosted, who are the vendors, where these services are, basically, you couldn't complete that process. So in this particular example, that caused a lot of delays. We couldn't meet the compliance requirements, and again, that ran into certain problems from a legal compliance perspective. But again, no direct security impact. But again, we couldn't complete our targeted compliance process. So to sum this up, this is important aspect of your risk management from an API governance perspective, that you identify each risk once you discover weaknesses or vulnerabilities in your from API perspective, of course, in your system. Then you want to map them to: is it a legal risk? Is it a operational risk? Is it a regulatory risk? And the heart of the problem is you must know all your APIs first, because as you remember, one of my slides was talking about APIs that you did not even know. So if you don't even know those APIs, then assessing these risks could be cumbersome. Now, I want to spend some time on the risk management. How do we basically mitigate these risks? What kind of models are available that we can adopt to manage this risk? But once again, before I get to that, just again, one quick pause to see if there are any questions.
No, we have no questions in the chat, Baljeet. But yeah, just a quick time check. We have 26 minutes left. If you just go with the content, basically.
Okay, great. Thank you. So if you have not looked into zero trust framework, then I encourage you to look into that. It is a model that has gotten attention, and lot of enterprises are looking at this model from a overall cybersecurity programs. Now, it's easy to understand from a high-level perspective, as I will explain, but it has 7 core principles. And one of the very first core principle is you must treat all your data sources, either these are software or services or even data lakes or whatnot, each and every source, you treat them as a resource. And access to all these resources must be through secured communication channels. You cannot simply say that, oh, this is a repo which is just internal to me. This can be communicated in not on a secure channel. And that is basically the second core principle. The third core principle is access to all those resources that are done through secure channels must be in a sessional way. So you might have seen this in, for example, in OAuth framework, you have session tokens. Now, this does not necessarily ask you to how long that session is. APIs or the resources could have different nature. So the session approach could be different in different contexts, depending on the nature of the business or the technology that is underlying providing these services. But again, you must have a sessional approach to when you are accessing these resources. The fourth core principle is all the policies that you have in place to access those resources that are perhaps sessional, must be in a dynamic way. So a lot of organizations have started to adopt this principle. If you notice, when you change your location, if you're accessing your email, the system asks is that you receive a token, or even in the case of credit cards, they have a way to identify certain parameters to see if the policies must be adjusted. And the fifth principle is you must monitor the security posture of your ecosystem constantly. That's a no-brainer. So you basically want to see all the resources that are being accessed. You are constantly evaluating the security posture of those resources. The sixth principle is all your resources must be authenticated and authorized. So just because you're authenticated, that does not necessarily mean that the user get access to all the different resources. So as you very much understand, authentication, authorization, and it must be enforced when accessing those resources. Last but not the least, you need to regularly collect additional pieces of information apart from monitoring your security posture. So you may have a policy, you may have a security mechanism or a process in place, but the seventh principle, what it dictates is you collect additional piece of information, whatever you can. I will give an example from API's context point of view on the next slide. But before I get there, I just want to quickly share some of the resources that you can access. One of this report is by NIST. The other report is by CSA, the Cloud Security Alliance, and I encourage you to look into some of these resources that I've listed here. Now, how we can take this model and adopt to API risk management purposes. Once again, you can quickly see that one-to-one mapping. Treat your APIs as products. They are your resources. Don't just treat them as a one integration point. They have their own life cycle. They have their own business purpose. They have their own technical purpose. Maybe you are doing all of those things. So the sooner you start to do, or sooner you start to treat them as a product, you can have a policy in place, you are treating them as your own resource, just like you would treat your other applications. And of course, you have exposed these APIs through secure channels. If it is an internal API, that does not necessarily mean that you're hosting in a way, that is giving access to everybody. Once again, if you are using, sessional approach to accessing those APIs, you need to decide, what kind of mechanisms that you are putting in place for implementing your sessional approach. Let me give you an example from a OAuth perspective. So it is not always possible for you to have a multi-factor authentication, have a sessional approach in all the cases, in all the scenarios. Simply because many times you have built APIs or you're consuming APIs for machine-to-machine communications and for that seamless integration. But again, the point here is you want to have all these principles applied in a way so that you can meet all these requirements in the best possible way. The dynamic policies I've already explained. In many cases, you want to have, let's say your application is moved, and suddenly you see an API key invoked from an application identifier that is not necessarily tied to that application. So should you grant access? Maybe not. Maybe you want to have a policy in place. So there is no fixed policy that you should rely upon. You must evaluate all these policies in time, space, in the context that they are being used. This could be user profile, this could be application profile, this could be vendor, this could be geography. So you want to consider all those parameters. And from a security monitoring perspective, of course, you can very much perform OWASP top 10 test on your APIs, look at their security posture, look at their authentication, authorization related problems, and of course you can check your API out, and then your partners or customers or your internal consumers can start to depend on them. But that doesn't mean that you do not monitor them on an ongoing basis. It is not just one-time assessment you need to do. So can you constantly monitor those API security posture? As you saw from the research that I listed that we conducted, as well as the recommendation given by your own community, OWASP, which came up with the top 10 API specific recommendations, you know that authentication authorization is very, very important. And as you can see that this is one of the core principles of zero trust model. You must enforce authentication authorization for all your APIs. There is no exception. Internal APIs, external APIs, is it partner API, is it a customer API? So you must enforce those authentication authorization principles. Last but not the least, all of this may still not be enough for you from a risk management perspective. Let me tell you some important use cases here. One of our customers or our client was essentially dealing with a situation where they were encountering a lot of fake registrations. And as you can imagine, even if you have an authenticated user who's authorized to access certain resources, it may still not be enough from a risk management perspective, because simply this authenticated authorized user can collect certain pieces of data over a longer period of time by accessing your data that could compromise your intellectual property. So how do you mitigate that risk? So the point here is, you may want to store the payloads, you may want to store the inputs to the API. You may want to observe all of that over a longer period of time to see what is the history, how it is being accessed. And you may not be able to detect this immediately. You may have an AI solution in place, but those AI solutions are already working with the boundaries that are defined by different data models or the policies, right? So unless until you collect these additional pieces of information, you cannot evolve those models. So in this case, you want to monitor behavior, you want to monitor the usage. And in many cases, you do this over a longer period of time to detect the threat, to detect the, to threat to your intellectual property or your data or your business integrity. So in many cases, customers may not allow you to store the payload. But again, it depends on the nature of the relationship you have with your customers and partners and the nature of the APIs you build or the APIs you're consuming. So do they allow you to store the payloads? Do they allow you to store the inputs? Maybe your vendor doesn't want you to store the payloads. So it all depends. It depends on the context, depends on your SLAs. But again, do the best you can. And the core principle here is, collect additional pieces of information if you can to mitigate your risk. But of course, we have to also respect the fact that we live in a GDPR world. It may not be possible for you to collect all the information that you would like to collect, but again, do the best you can, as I said. So how do we put a process in place from a risk management perspective? Now, there is no single process, or there is no single way you can define a process and say, okay, this is a process that will work for everybody. But here is a suggested process that we believe could be useful to a lot of organizations, including yours. So here, we are talking about a way to discover your bill of materials from an API perspective. If you have paid attention, in the beginning of this year, there was a presidential order which talks about software supply chains. Your software supply chain bill of materials are not complete without disclosing, what's your API ecosystem look like? Who are the vendors? Where those vendors are deploying their APIs? Are these internal APIs? If these are internal, how do you access them? So having the ability to scan your ecosystem, having the ability to discover, list your APIs in a way that brings visibility to your organization is the beginning of your API risk management. Okay, that is where you start, but that doesn't stop there. Once you have that, you need to identify all these risks that I'm talking about: legal risks, security risks. Are these free APIs? If this is free, does that mean that you don't have any obligations? A lot of vendors are building APIs where you can access them for free, but depending on, just like with the open source movement, you have certain obligations, and the risk could be even more greater than just using open source, because unless until somebody knows your bill of material from a software point of view, they never know what software libraries are embedded there. But APIs are very dynamic. The moment you invoke them, they already know that this is the API that you're using, because of course they're hosting that API. So you need to identify those legal risks, the security risks. You need to vet their security posture. You need to do the data governance assessment. You need to do the PII assessment. All those assessments need to do to identify those risks. Once you do that, that one-time assessment may not be enough. You need to do this on an ongoing basis. You must track these issues on an ongoing basis. And these issues could evolve. Your APIs may change. Your JSON response suddenly started including a tag that you were not supposed to expose. So how do you detect those issues? Maybe you have a new version of the API. You have deprecated others. Have you communicated that to your customers and partners? How do you do that? So all of this needs to be alerted, and different stakeholders needs to be informed. But last, but the least piece is recommendation. Now, recommendation could be as simple as, let's move this API that is hosted there from this region to this region. You deploy your containers differently, and you provision your resources differently. So DevOps related activities. But you could have very complex recommendation as well. For example, you had no idea about certain APIs. Suddenly you discover it, and you want to do the technical due diligence, working with the licensing team, working with the product team, what exactly this API does, what data is being transacted. And then you need to make a recommendation, what exactly needs to be done. So in summary, this process could already be very complex depending on what is your objective and how deeper and how wider you want to implement this process. We will see. I wanted to share some hands-on user or scenarios that that I talked about from a discovery perspective, from assessment perspective, from monitoring perspective. But I will take a quick pause here, summarize this, and if the time permits, I will check with Swarup and the rest of the colleagues. Then we will see some real examples. But before I go show you some hands-on examples, let me summarize what we discussed today. So I talked about how API ecosystems are evolving at the global scale. You know, currently we see hundreds and thousands of APIs. They will grow into millions, and that millions will translate into hundreds of thousands within your API ecosystem in your organization. And governance to those APIs is a key to your risk management. You know, you need to not only look at the security issues, you need to look at you know, financial risks. You need to classify other types of business risks that may come with the usage of those APIs. And then we looked at what are the possible solutions we can adopt to manage those risks. So in particular, we reviewed zero trust model, which with the 7 core principles that we can nicely map to API risk management issues as well. And you know, one of the core principles that that is relevant to this particular community is look at the authentication authorization related issues. So with that note, Swarup, I hand it back to you. See if you want to open this up to the community for any live questions. If not, then I'm happy to give a quick live demo as well. We have roughly around 7-8 minutes.
Correct. Yeah. So we don't have any questions in the chat. If anybody is having any questions, please unmute themselves and ask the question to Baljeet. If not, Baljeet, I mean, I'm not sure how much time it will take to quickly show a scenario what you're talking about. We have 8 minutes left.
Yeah, I can quickly wrap that up in maybe 5 minutes. So I just want to quickly show them the glimpse of you know, what are the possibilities. It may look like a very complex ecosystem that we need to build, but it's not too bad. We could start somewhere, and then of course it's the audience imagination, how they take those lessons and start applying them within their organization. So without further ado, I will stop sharing and quickly share my browser. I have examples. So let's share my screen again. So this is the link has been shared in my slide deck. So I'll make sure that you guys have access to the slide. So I'll be happy to send the link. Nicole, if you don't mind, if you can please put this link into the chat window so the colleagues can access the link from the chat window itself. But that it will bring you to this this link. So I already have an account. I don't need to create the account, but you feel free to create an account and use this. But I will, since I have an account, I will simply sign in and access this. All right, so the first thing I want to refer to is this part of the process where I talked about, how do you bring visibility from your API ecosystem? So the quick example I want to share with you here is from a software application security perspective, you guys know that, there are different tools, including open source tools available, where you can assess your application, from a security point of view. But in this case, I want to show you a scenario where I'm accessing this from a API ecosystem perspective. For example, this is these are some of the examples I've scanned. Now here, the scanning means I'm interested in discovering what could be the APIs in this application. By the way, for this demonstration, I took the tool that was available on GitHub, which is actually OWASP tool contributed by one of the community members. And what I did is I scanned this. The purpose for my scan was to see what APIs do I see in this application. So here you can see the first bill of material I see is there is a Google Earth API integration, there is a Twitter API integration, and whatnot. The purpose here is for me to find out, even before I start to depend on this library, to bring this visibility, so that if I was not aware, then I know that. Now, that does not necessarily mean that the Twitter API could be invoked. So I also want to conduct some sort of a black box testing. So here I want to scan certain gateways. I want to see if I can deploy certain dynamic scanning tools and assess these APIs from a security perspective as well. For example, since we don't have time, just to save some time here, I'm showing you the recipe of running a OWASP top 10 security test against a bunch of my APIs. And once I run these test cases, I want to see a report which lists all these problems that I've identified. So of course, some of these could be passed, some of these could be failed. So I want to constantly run these test cases on an ongoing basis. In some cases, I'm showing you the test scenarios where all my security test cases are passed. But as you can imagine, I could generate a report in which it might show that not every test case is passed. For example, I can generate a report which may look something like this. Now, this is not the only way to generate a report, but you get the proof of concept that I'm talking about. And it would not be very productive if you are running these test cases, manually or in a fashion that would require me to go check these results. So I want to run this programmatically on an ongoing basis, as one of the that I talked about here. So you identify these issues, you monitor them. The last but not the least piece could be, once you discover your bill of materials, you want to list all your APIs according to different business units, by different business vendors, or whatever your classification may be. You want to look at the licensing issues. You want to look at issues that might be translated to direct security problems and whatnot. The last piece is, and I think that should conclude my presentation, is I want to see the global view of my API ecosystem. So very quickly, I can see a global picture that I showed you in my slide deck as well, where I want to identify, show me all vendors where exactly they're located. So as I showed in my diagram, each vendor tells me where exactly they're located. How can I drill down to that information and see what exactly that API does, maybe make a live call and see all that. So that pretty much sums up what I wanted to show, to let the audience imagine, from an API risk management perspective, what are the different elements we need to put in place. So once again, in the summary, I demonstrated all these different pieces where we scan, identify, track, recommend to help us with the risk management, API risk management problems. This is my contact information. I'm happy to stay for another minute or two to see if there are any questions. If not, please feel free to reach out to us. Nicole, my colleague, is on the call, or reach out to the OWASP organizing committee, and they will be happy to connect you with us. So with that note, thank you so much, Swarup, and the rest of the colleagues at OWASP Bay Area chapter. We are really honored to be part of this community and happy to see you guys in the future as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Baljeet, for sharing the information. And that for me, it is at least first time where I'm correlating the zero trust model with API security. And this is very helpful. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.